under the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality. We are here tonight to hear about the proposed draft Brownfields agreement that the town of Chapel Hill seeks to enter into. And there will be a presentation as well as, most important, public comments that we will be able to hear from you all tonight. Before we get started, I would like to just mention restroom facilities in case anyone needs them. They are directly outside of this room. You would make a right. Keep straight until you see red and white letters on the right-hand side that reads restroom right before entering into the main area of the library. At this time, I am going to turn it over to Sharon Eckert, who will be able to introduce herself as well as the team that is going to make the presentation. And following that, we'll come back with the public comment section. Okay, actually, Bruce is going to start us off. Okay. Sorry.
Okay, yes, my name is Bruce Nicholson, and thank you for coming tonight. I am the Brownfields Redevelopment Section Chief, and we are here to talk about the Chapel Hill Police Department draft Brownfield agreement. Thank you all for sending in public comments. Thank you for attending here today to add additional ones. I would like to mention a little bit about the Brownfields program and what it is we're all about. Let me take you back to 1997 when the statute was first passed. In the General Assembly designed the statute to safely reuse abandoned and underutilized properties that had environmental impacts. At that particular point in time, there was a growing universe of contaminated properties for which banks would not loan money and were sort of collecting up in an elephant's graveyard of non-performing properties. And in a way, what we're attempting to do here with these abandoned, idled, and underutilized properties is to recycle them, put them back into good use. And there are many particular benefits, and the reasons why the General Assembly passed this is that it also reduces sprawl and protects greenfields by recycling and reusing these properties. But they wanted to make sure to do so safely. And it also provides economic development in areas that sorely need it in many cases, and job creation as well in those particular areas. So these non-performing properties can be put back into good use and then perform on the tax rolls again for local government. And so this not only makes good sense from an environmental standpoint and risk assessment standpoint, but also as well as an economic standpoint. And so it's sort of the nexus of those two items. So let me talk about a little bit about how we do that. It is a voluntary program, and prospective developers who are interested in redeveloping properties that are contaminated will apply into the program. They have a particular interest in developing these properties, and in this case, it's the town of Chapel Hill. The entity who applies in cannot have caused or contributed to the contamination in any way, and that is statutory, and the town has not done so here. And the liability for the contaminator of any of these brownfield properties remains with the contaminator. But the brownfield agreement itself is a legally binding agreement with the prospective developer and DEQ, and it's designed to provide a framework for which that property can be made safe for the use that they propose to make of it. And instead of being remediated to unrestricted use standards. That is the actual phraseology in the statute. So we do this by defining that liability and what has to be done in the actual agreement. And when we do that, barriers to financing a project and the redevelopment of that project are broken. And banks look at brownfield agreements as legally binding and ways in which protects their investment on the property because it's defined liability to that particular prospective developer. And so they're willing to lend money on the redevelopment. And so this has been working since 1997, and there are approximately 750 properties representing over 13,000 acres that have been put back and recycled into use. It represents an investment over $30 billion in these properties since the inception of the program. Thousands of jobs have been created, and there has been zero appropriation from the legislature for this program. It runs on fees that we gather from the prospective developers themselves. And I might say also that there are about a dozen properties in Orange County itself that are in various states. 10 of them have been completed, and including the Wegmans that you might be familiar with, that was on a former car dealership. So there are many brownfield properties across the state and many even locally around here. This is just one other property that is going through the program. Let me also tell you what the Brownfields program is not about. It doesn't affect the state's ability to enforce against a contaminating property. And we, as I said, we only work with entities such as the town who did not cause or contribute to the contamination at the property. The program does not usurp local government zoning, and that's specific in the statute as well. And that it doesn't waive any requirements on the new owner or the prospective developer to meet and any permits or certification required as they do that redevelopment, whether it be stormwater or other permits. There's nothing in the Brownfield agreement that affects that. They have to get any and all permits that are required of any development project that is ongoing. And so our process here, and a little bit about where we are in the process for this particular site as well. There's an eligibility review at the very beginning where we look at the prospective developer and we look at their proposed project, and we match that with the state, with the criteria in the statute to make sure that the site is in fact eligible and meets those statutory criteria. That did happen here. And then we look on to what is known about the site. What is the contamination information that we currently have? What data gaps do we need to fill and gather more assessment data to make decisions on the property about the proposed reuse? And in May of 2022, on this particular site, there was a public presentation at this particular stage, and we received many public comments at that public participation. And I think as we move forward in here, I don't want to steal Sharon's thunder. She's talking about the Brownfield agreement, but you'll see that a lot of that information was taken into account as we move forward into development of the agreement itself. Once we know what they're interested in redeveloping, and that was a key component to develop the Brownfield agreement, and the town here took a lot of that public information and comment in, and that really was many of those public comments were saying, don't use this as in a residential way, if possible. And I think the town heard that and was in this way decided not to use it residentially, and you'll see that reflected in the agreement. And as I said in the May 22nd meeting, the Brownfields program itself doesn't advocate for any particular land use. That really is up to the prospective developer. and we don't supersede local zoning, as I said. We develop the agreement based on the desires of the prospective developer and how they would like to use it. And so we have done so here, and now we're at the highlighted stage here where we're seeking public comment on the draft agreement itself that has been put out for public comment. Ultimately, when the Brownfield agreement is completed, it'll be executed and recorded at the County Register of Deeds, and there will be a stewardship and a monitoring of that in accordance with the agreement itself. And I appreciate that. And let me, at this point in time, bring up Franny Nielsen, who is Dr. Franny Nielsen, who is a DEQ toxicologist, and will provide information about the risk evaluation that took place here at this site.
Good evening. Thank you for being here. As Bruce said, my name is Franny. I am the environmental toxicologist at the Department of Environmental Quality. I also serve as the risk assessor and a risk communicator for the department. Today, I'm just going to describe the risk assessment and risk management process to you. And
Up the mic just a bit.
sorry, am I dancing around? Should I just hold it?
Yeah, I was gonna say, you're gonna hold it.
Okay.
Speak though.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to go through the risk assessment and risk management process that DEQ and the Brownfields program use in their assessment of these sites. This is a critical step in the evaluation process and enables solutions to be determined that protect public health. This process identifies pathways of exposure and the risk associated with those pathways. Risk is the combination of the dose of a chemical or contaminant combined with the exposure experienced. Either of these variables fluctuating up or down can influence risk, since it's just a very basic math equation. All of these pieces enable us to evaluate and determine the best solutions for risk management at these complex brownfield sites. The environmental risk assessment process requires sampling of a variety of environmental media, and we compare those media and the environmental results with any existing regulatory values. DEQ uses both of these values to calculate risk, and this is done through a software program that ensures accurate calculations consistently over time. The exposure pathway assessment is where the risk is contextualized in the real world. And I, as a rule, don't read slides, but I am going to read this one to you. So the purpose of this assessment is to really answer the question, could people be exposed to any of these contaminants that may be on the site based on the redevelopment plan? This is where the contaminant is identified and the source is identified. The location is identified. This answers a lot of questions, and a few of these are, does this contaminant move or change in the environment? How would people come into contact with this contaminant? How does the contaminant enter a person's body if they do come into contact with it? And how would people in the community be exposed? By evaluating the exposure pathways, and if they are complete, this enables us to look at the options that render these pathways incomplete. And I'll show you a diagram in a second that makes that a little easier to understand. The risk-based remediations address these applicable exposure pathways and their components and how we can break this exposure pathway cycle and stop any kind of exposure happening from a contaminated site. The risk management evaluation is designed to look at the assessed risks that are based on the exposure and the dose of the contaminant and determine how best to manage those risks by remediation or land use restrictions or other management techniques. Some examples of this are the prohibition of groundwater use or vapor intrusion mitigation systems that are a lot like the radon mitigation systems that they used to use. Last one. So risk management is really about cutting off the pathways of exposure for health protection. The route of exposure can be disconnected. So from the contamination source to the potential exposure route, that arrow can be disconnected. Or the route of exposure to the receptor can be disconnected. And so this is a pathway of exposure to a person or an animal or the environment. That arrow can be disconnected. The best solution for the site and for the intended use is found through this entire process. And by disconnecting these pathways of exposure is how the remediation is implemented. That's all I have.
So Sharon Eckert is gonna take it from here. Sorry. I wasn't prepared.
Thank you, Franny. Let me see if I can, how do I put this back in? See if that'll work. I don't want to hold this for the entirety of my, can you help? Thank you. Just got to be more firm. Okay, I'm working on that. All right, can everyone hear me okay? All right, great. Let's see. How do I advance this? I don't see the slide here. Just advance this way. Yeah, okay, fantastic. So thank you everyone for coming tonight. My name is Sharon Eckert. I am a supervisor with the Brownfields redevelopment section, and since late 2021, I have been the project manager for this Chapel Hill Brownfields project. I'm here to speak to you tonight about the content of the Brownfield agreement, what we found, and what are the next steps. So on this slide, you see the Brownfields agreement it's a legally enforceable document between the state and the prospective developer, in this case, who is the town of Chapel Hill. It has the background, summary of the uses, summary of the contaminant sources, and most importantly, the work to be performed section, land use restrictions that are developed based on site-specific data, and legal obligations. There are continuing obligations that are on any prospective developer or follow-on owner of the brownfield property. Those include abiding by all of the land use restrictions and also submitting an annual land use restriction update form. There are other documents that are associated with the brownfield package. Those of you who went to our Laserfish portal during the beginning of public comment in July 2024, you would have seen these documents. They're still up there if you want to take a look. They're in a file that has PCPKG in the file name, stands for Public Comment Package. So that'll show you the full brownfield package. All right, so the brownfield process requires at least a 30-day public comment period. And once DEQ approved the town to go to public comment, the town conducted the required public notice tasks that you see here bulleted, and the public comment period started in July 2024. The town and others requested that we hold a public meeting, and so we're complying with that request as per our statute in this meeting's why we're here tonight. All right, this is just a quick site vicinity map so you can kind of see where the site is located. I don't know if you guys can see that there. You can see the thin blue line. That is Bowling Creek, and it does border the southern part of the property. All right, I'm going to go quickly through a timeline for those of you who may not be familiar with all the activities that have taken place on the site and how this came to be. So the site was created in the 1950s as a borrow pit by the site owner at that time. To fill the pit, structural fill, including coal combustion products, that's the CCP there. You'll see that abbreviation throughout this document. That's same as coal ash. That and construction debris were placed to fill in the material there. That occurred in the 1960s and the 1970s. This means that this material has been here for a long time. It's been here for at least 50 to 60 years. In the early 80s, the town purchased the property and subsequently built the existing police station building on the property. And due to concerns regarding the coal ash after a phase 1 environmental site assessment was conducted in 2013, the town contacted DEQ, and the branch that they contacted was the Inactive Hazardous Sites branch. That's a sister branch in the Division of Waste Management where Brownfields also lies. And so for the first several years, the town was working with IHSB project managers to start the environmental assessment at the property. So that's in the 2013 timeframe. By 2018, the town was evaluating remedial measures for this project. And when it became clear that the town wished to redevelop the property, IHSB contacted Brownfields, the town. We started engaging with the town in discussions as to whether or not it might be a good fit for this property to be in the Brownfields program. So in 2019, the town applied to the program. We went through our eligibility review process and issued a letter of eligibility to the town in late 2019. We also approved an environmental management plan that the town put together so that they could proceed with some interim remedial measures at the site. They also, in this time frame, the town was conducting health and ecological risk assessments related to public health and also the health of the creek. Okay, let's see, next slide. So in 2020, sorry, got off topic here. In 2022, Brownfields now is starting to assess, look at all the assessment data that's been collected over almost a decade by that time. And we were involved in the town in discussions about the redevelopment. This is initially in early 2022, where residential use was still being considered. That by the end of 2022, I don't think it was any longer under consideration. In May 2021, I presented at a town meeting where we talked about where we were in the process, and that we were squarely in the assessment phase of a brownfield project. Part of that, we look at everything that's been collected on a site, the data that's been collected, and we evaluate, are there any data gaps here? Do we need to do additional assessment to understand risk at the site and make appropriate risk management decisions for those risks? So subsequently in summer of 2022, we came up with a scope of work. The consultant that the town has been working with since 2016, Hart & Hickman, developed that scope of work and implemented it in August, I think, of 2022. The report for that work came out and was finalized in December of 2022. So in 2023, we, meaning I, compiled all the data and put that data into risk calculators that would quantify the environmental risk associated with all the various exposure pathways that we had. We also started writing and negotiating the actual brownfield agreement language with the town. These agreements are negotiated agreements. We go back and forth with language, and that happened here as well. In October of 2023, there was another entity that filed a CERCLA petition with EPA stating that they felt that EPA should look at this site for inclusion on the national priorities list, meaning they felt it should be a federal Superfund site. During that time period, we held off moving forward. And when EPA opined on May 1st, 2024, that in their view, the best course of action would be to continue on the state brownfields process, we continued work. We pulled everything up from where we last left it and updated it, because now there's new screening levels to look at, and made sure that all the documentation was up to date. That when that occurred, we were able to give the town approval to proceed to public comment. And that's what we did in late June, and public comment started in July. And then here we are as a result of that. All right, I'm not going to dwell on this site, and there's a lot of stuff here. I just want to show you, this is a map from Hart and Hickman report. This states the sample locations. You can see all the gray, yellow, and blue. Hopefully you can see that. All the gray, yellow, and blue points are sample locations. You can see there's a really wide distribution around the site. The boundary is the red border around the site. That is prior to our data gap assessment. This is a subsequent map from 2022. This will shows you the additional locations that were sampled in 2022 as part of that data gap analysis. You can also see these white lines, and these orange lines are the silt fencing that went up. I'll talk about that in a moment. All right. So I mentioned, I think I mentioned the interim remedial measures that the town implemented in 2020. So this is a synopsis of what they undertook at the site, and includes the removal and disposal of coal ash material and soil with offsite disposal, the placement of clean quarry and topsoil to replace that which was excavated, hydroseeding of the embankment to try and stabilize that, the stormwater upgrades. There was a stormwater diversion channel that was constructed at the top of the slope. And these are interim remedial measures. This in no way is considered a final remedy. And in so doing, it definitely needs to be monitored and maintained, and occasionally needs to be repaired. Particularly during storms. It's my understanding that the town inspects this site when there's at least a rainfall event of a ½ inch, I believe. Okay, this shows you a close-up of the post-IRM interim remedial measures conditions. This is from a Hart Hickman report from April 19th, 2021. And you can see the different colors that you see, the blue, yellow, and pink, show distinguish how much feet of fill, clean soil, is above the coal ash material. And you will see again an up close of the silt fencing that was put in. And I believe also the trail, I think, was might have been rerouted. I think that's what that red line shows. And you can see how, the proximity to the creek as well, which is in the bottom of that picture. Okay, so interim remedial measures are interim, and they do require maintenance. So in early 2024, they contacted me, and we put together an environmental management plan to go out and conduct some of these measures. So there was additional excavation of soil and placement behind the silt fences that was needed. There was installation of additional silt fencing material, additional hydroseeding, and soil sampling after these measures were put in place. And then there was an erosional event that occurred in that stormwater diversion channel that was also fixed. Okay, so here's some photographs after the maintenance activity. These photos are pulled from a Hart and Hickman report dated June 5th, 2024. And you can see that stormwater diversion channel repair is obvious on the far right-hand side as you're sitting. You can see the silt fencing on these other pictures here. Okay, fun stuff. Are you guys ready for data? This is a summary table of that provides an overview of the constituents that we find in various media. So these are the constituents that we find that are in excess of North Carolina screening levels. That would be non-residential screening levels, because there is no residential development considered here, or what's in excess of North Carolina groundwater or surface water standards. So principally, not a surprise with coal ash, we see primarily metals as constituents in excess of these standards or screening levels. And it's important to note here that screening levels are not action levels. That is, if a constituent exceeds a screening level or a background level even, because sometimes for metals, they're naturally occurring, so we'll have background levels of those in soil, it doesn't necessarily mean that that material is harmful to public health or the environment. It just means that we need to conduct additional analysis to evaluate the risks posed by that material to the environment. So in this chart, you can see that for groundwater, we have exceedances of metals primarily in wells constructed within the coal ash fill. That is to be expected. Also down gradient of the coal ash fill material. And down gradient refers to wells that are located between the coal ash, up underneath the parking lot of the police station, and then between, and then the creek. And we even see it in the background, upgradient offsite well, MW5. That's not even on the property. That is really, and it's a bedrock well that's in sort of naturally contains these metals. Well, and 11D is the well that we have below the CCP fill material, but it doesn't have the exceedances of metals. So that the wells within the material have. You can note that the suite of metals, if you look under the notes, you can see that the number of metals is much larger for the wells in the CCP and down gradient of it. They're very different looking underneath the CCP and in MW5. We do observe that there are some concentrations of some of these metals that are decreasing since they've first been sampled. And that's a good thing. We're very encouraged by that. But there are 3 wells that if you've looked at the Brownfield agreement, you'll see that we would like the town to continue to monitor. And those are wells MW3A, MW4A, and MW6. These are the down gradient wells I'm referring to that are located between the coal ash and the creek. So it's encouraging that these concentrations are decreasing, and we want to continue to monitor that to see if that trend continues. All right, so in terms of soil, we sampled a number of different levels in the soil, 0 to 3 feet. BGS stands for below ground surface, so that's a depth. We sampled the coal ash material itself. That also would include samples that had coal ash mixed in with soil. And that the depths that we looked at there range from anywhere from 0 to 28 feet below ground surface. There was also some drainage pathway soil. I think that was relatively shallow. And there was one soil sample that was collected from that offsite upgradient well boring for MW5. So in soil, it's primarily arsenic, and then we do have 1 hit of mercury in the CCP that are in excess of non-residential screening levels. You can see the values there on the right-hand side. In the, one thing I want to say, for arsenic has relatively low screening levels. The non-residential screening level for arsenic is 3 milligrams per kilogram in soil, or then that's equivalent to ppm or parts per million, if you folks are familiar with those units. And the thing to note about that is that it's so low that it's actually within the range of arsenic in background North Carolina soils. So usually when we're seeing single digit values of arsenic, although it's above screening levels, it still could easily be background. Some places in the western part of North Carolina have background arsenic levels as much, much higher. But what we see here in the shallow upper 3 feet, the average concentration of arsenic is 4.2 milligrams per kilogram, clearly still within that background range. Not surprisingly, in the CCP, the coal ash material, that average is higher, 33.1, with a maximum of 95.9 milligrams per kilogram. And then within the drainage pathway, you got an average in between those two. All right. The other thing we look at, it's very important from a brownfield standpoint, is to evaluate with redevelopment and in existing buildings, if they're going to be used, whether there are any risks associated with vapor intrusion or radon. And radon can be an issue because it's a natural decay product of radium, and radium can be in coal ash. What we found here is there really was not soil gas issues in subslab samples at all, subslab vapor that underneath the police building. And we found in exterior soil gas samples, you see that there are some, acetone and 4-ethyltoluene, trichlorofluoromethane. These are often laboratory contaminants. They'll pop up there. There's no established screening levels for them, so we include them in our data tables as a detection, but we're really not concerned with those in terms of risk. And what we found with radon is there were 5 samples collected. Most did not have any detections of radon. There was 2 detections that were at the detection level of 0.4 picocuries per liter. That's the concentration of radon or units that we use for radon. And that is, a tenth of what EPA sets as an action level for radon in enclosed buildings of 4 picocuries per liter. So radon's not an issue. We also looked at methane. Methane can be generated by, areas of land, fill in land, particularly from organic materials. And I don't know if I mentioned it, but I think I mentioned at the beginning, there's construction debris here. We wanted to see whether there could be organic materials here that could also be a factor. And so we looked at methane. That was not an issue. And then lastly, we looked at the creek, and we know that there are many of you here that are passionate about Bowling Creek and want to protect it, and we completely understand why. I have walked this trail myself. It's a really beautiful spot. But we've sampled the surface water, and the town has sampled the surface water and the creek sediment 3 times, in 2013, in 2014, 2016, and 2019. And we do not see concentrations of these constituents of interest in surface water or creek sediment in excess of the applicable standards. There was one exception to that in 2013. There was a value of manganese that exceeded an EPA surface water standard, but that was never repeated in the 3 other sampling events. So by and large, the concentrations in creek water that were detected were also not appreciably different upstream of the coal ash site, across from the coal ash site, or downstream of the coal ash site. So really, there's really no evidence from this almost a decade of sampling that there is significant impact from this coal ash material in the creek. Okay, so what's the upshot of all this information? After incorporating the maximum concentrations of these contaminants identified in the site media into various DEQ risk calculators that quantifies the risk, that helps us understand the risk from a quantifiable viewpoint. No one's just grabbing, stuff out of midair here. It's quantified based on toxicological data, based on toxicological equations that Franny could go into, but I'm not. And what the upshot is for non-residential uses, which is what is planned here, there are 3 areas of concern from a risk assessment standpoint, and only 2 of them apply here. The first is non-residential groundwater. That exceeded risk, but no one has used the water supply at this site as a water supply, right? The water here is not planned to be used as water supply. It never has been. And in addition, it would be specifically prohibited by the Brownfield Agreement. So this is an example of breaking that completed exposure pathway. No one's going to be exposed to this groundwater through the water supply. The second bullet, construction worker exposure, is something of interest here. There is a concern here from that aspect. And construction workers pose a special case because it's these workers that will be coming in contact with this material. And their risk of inhalation and ingestion is greater than the average person using this site, especially if personal protective equipment or health and safety procedures are not followed. So it's something that is very important. The way it works, though, is our role, the state's role in this. We don't regulate these workers. The state's role is to inform the prospective developer, in this case, the town, and through the town, the general contractors and subcontractors of the risks associated with these materials so that they are protected. And it is the responsibility of these companies to make sure that the health and safety of their workers is protected. And they do that by training programs, they do that by personal protective equipment, engineering controls during whatever work that puts these workers in harm's way. The third avenue here is a recreator trespasser exposure to the fill itself. I want to caution you here, this is not about the trail. That was the health risk, ecological risk of the trail was looked at years ago. This exposure is if someone was playing or exposed to the material that's, sitting underneath, and actually I think the values in there are kind of at great depth underneath the police station building itself. So what this means is that for these pathways, we need to take appropriate actions to break the completion of this exposure pathway. All right, so that gets us, to how do you do that? Well, that's the final remedy, and that's the next step here. So the town has not selected which final remedy to pursue at this particular site. The Brownfield Agreement provides a framework for what is required if any of the coal ash material remains as part of the final remedy at the site. All of that language in the Brownfield Agreement that relates to the final remedy is in the work to be performed section in these paragraphs, 11, 12, and several sub-paragraphs in 13 that you have here. These goals are also specified in the Brownfield Agreement. Any final remedy has got to be designed to make the site stable. The slope has to be stabilized. It has to eliminate the completed exposure pathways, and it has to be fully protective of public health. The remedy is going to be implemented either prior to or in conjunction with the redevelopment, and it needs to be designed and installed or implemented under the jurisdiction of a North Carolina licensed professional engineer. DEQ will be approving these plans. We're going to be continuing to work with the town to make sure that the designs are safe and that they're implemented correctly. All right, I'm going to go back to the Brownfield Agreement for just a moment. This is important. Bruce mentioned this at the beginning, but I want to make sure people are aware of this. This is the beginning of paragraph 13 where the land use restrictions are in the Chapel Hill Agreement. And this running with the land is important because the town, should they at some future time sell this site or a portion of the site to other entities, those entities are also responsible to abide by the agreement and to work with the state of North Carolina if necessary. So that's really important. And what that sets up for us here is the long-term stewardship that is so critical to a successful brownfield agreement. And how we have a process, our property management process, we have a branch, but the process is in place. They include reviewing the annual land use restriction update forms that any owner of the property has got to submit to us annually. And also they conduct site inspections. So it is very possible that our inspectors during implementation of this final remedy, whatever it becomes, that will be there also watching at some point in time. We don't just walk away. Okay. The approved land uses. We said residential's not in here. Here's the proof. No use may be made of the Brownfields property other than for a municipal service center, office, retail, recreational, associated parking, and transit uses, and with prior written approval from DEQ, other commercial uses. Residential does not appear. And I would also say that this list does not create an affirmative obligation for the town to do all of these things. It's just that these are the things that are approved. All right. I'm not going to go into detail on these. These are the other land use restrictions that are in the Brownfield agreement. These are the topics that the land use restrictions are under, the headings. And they all work together with the final remedy to make sure that the site is redeveloped safely and that it's safe for that particular reuse. All right, we're getting close to the end of this presentation. We'll get into comments very soon. So first, we just want to reiterate that Brownfields is a public process. In order to prepare the BFA, we have reviewed comments received by some of you sitting here since 2022, when you all knew, you knew then my name and you sent me emails. And I appreciate that information. Moving forward, we're going to review comments that we have received. I received a couple of them yesterday and today in advance of this meeting. And anything that comes out of this meeting, we will take that into consideration. And, you know, and that's really it. We're here to listen. So we're going to, conduct, conduct environmental risk assessment and risk management evaluation with the site-specific data. It kind of gives you an overview of how we get to the decisions, what Franny was talking about. And then, of course, we have the land use restrictions recorded on the deed. So it's the combination of the institutional control of the Brownfield agreement, the final remedy, the design and implementation of the final remedy, and that's an engineering control, and then continued monitoring and the long-term stewardship that combine to make this site safe. So the next steps. Clearly, final remedy decisions, that is up to the town. That's going to be under a separate town process. As for Brownfields, as per our statute, we're going to consider any public comments that we have received since July and anything that comes out of what you're all about to share with us today. We're going to evaluate whether, based on any of that, there should be any modification of the language to the Brownfield agreement. And we will provide a written response to all of those comments that we get today. And then once the Brownfield agreement is final, the agreement will be recorded at the Brownfields, at the Register of Deeds. Okay, so where you can find documents associated with this project, they're on a DEQ's Laserfiche repository. You can get to it through the DEQ website. Also, the town has a compendium of documents that have been generated at the site on their coal ash at 828 site. You can also, it's sometimes a little easier to get to the Laserfiche link by going to our Brownfield site inventory map. You can then go to the parcel of interest and click on that, zoom into it, and you should have a link that'll take you directly to the Laserfish files for that particular project. I'm going to leave this up here. This is contact information for Bruce, Franny, myself, and Catherine. And with that, I just want to thank you very, very much for your time and attention tonight and your participation. We hope you found it informative. And I'm going to turn this over to Catherine, who's now going to transition us into public comment.
Okay, perfect. So I have a list here of those who requested to speak tonight. And what we will do is go directly down this list. I will call your name. Yes, absolutely. Thank you for the reminder. Is that better for you? Perfect. Okay, so I have a list here with the names of individuals who asked to speak this evening. And what I will do is call each name as it is listed here on the list. There will be approximately a 3-minute time frame just to make sure that we are able to hear from everyone tonight. So just please be mindful of your neighbors because we want to hear everybody's comment tonight. And also there will be a timekeeper over to your right. We ask that you come here to this middle microphone so that we are able to hear you as well as those who are listening in online. Okay? So the first, if time permits, will other people be able to speak as well? Not on the list. So you had to sign the actual sheet in order to speak tonight.
When the people sign the sheet.
Yes.
Sign the sheet.
Yeah. Okay. Questions? Let's see how we're doing questions. I'll read the comments first. Yes. So we're going to start with the comments first, and then we'll go to questions after that. Okay. So for the first individual, and I believe it's Shiva or Shiva.
Hey, thanks for this opportunity to give a comment. I'm Shiva. I'm a sophomore at UNC Chapel Hill, Shiva Raghunath, Chapel Hill. And I'm also one of the people who likes it at that and didn't know that there was the risk of getting cold after I did that. A few things. First of all, Brownfields, as you said, is a public process. The implementation of the final remedy, whatever it may be, is not. And so by approving a Brownfields agreement before that final remedy has been decided upon, the DEQ is essentially forfeiting the public's leverage point to determine what that final remedy is. And I have little faith in the town council to take action in a way that I would be, fit or feel safe with, given just kind of a long history with this property. The town of Chapel Hill, they do like to talk. I believe that the public officials care about climate action. But in order to understand the full picture of the town's environmental commitments, you have to dig deeper, but not much deeper, just about 2 feet under the surface, where you'll find a bunch of coal ash that the town knew was being dumped in this area in the 60s and 70s. Like we pretend like it was discovered in 2013. Yeah, it was tested maybe in 2013. We've known. The reason that all this ash has been allowed to be there for so long and was allowed to be dumped there in the first place is simply because of racism. And I worry here again that we're gonna have a similar problem, right? Where without oversight of the DEQ, especially this final remedy, this problem's not gonna be fixed. Ultimately, though, I understand you guys continue to be involved in the process after the approval of the Brownfield agreement, but I don't trust you guys, and I'm not supposed to. And it's not because I don't have a lot of respect for you. I'm an environmentalist. I really like it, but you guys really just don't have the capacity to oversee this to the degree of the scrutiny that I would like to see in order to feel safe with a bunch of poison slowly leaking into the groundwater. Because that's why when the amount of toxins drop off, it's not like those metals are just disappearing. They're like slowly leaking away. poisoning capital communities, Orange County communities, and downstream communities. So I urge you to reject the draft proposal and change language, at least require implementation of final revenue before approving any additional redevelopment, so that the public has full understanding and transparency as to what is going to be, as to the mitigation strategy of this poison that's been in the community for years, and that the town, in the first place, allowed to be placed there. Thank you.
Thank you, Shiva. The next person is Tom.
Good evening, I'm Tom Henkel. I'm the past chairperson of the Chapel Hill Environmental Stewardship Advisory Board, the word known as ESAB, which has had the coal ash problem at 828 MLK Junior Boulevard on our agenda for several years. When this problem was first identified over 10 years ago, I lived at 3 Mount Bolus Road, which is just up the hill from the contaminated site. I would also point out that I offered my irrigation well, which is 125 feet deep, to be used to get samples of the groundwater to see if there was any contaminants from it. I do not know if any tests of my irrigation well was made, so you might take a look at that. Since I was a member of the predecessor ESAB advisory board, the town staff invited me to participate with a select committee to analyze and discuss the coal ash issue and to make recommendations on what actions the town should take. The general consensus of this committee was that no redevelopment of this site should be undertaken unless all of the coal ash was first removed. In the fall of 2022, the ESAB held a virtual public hearing to consider what should be done about the coal ash at this site. And we heard from Dr. Avner Van Gogh, Distinguished Professor of Environmental Quality at Duke University. He and his colleagues had conducted testing of the site to determine the toxicity of the buried coal ash, and they prepared an extensive report. I will now give you a copy of this report, because I don't know if you have seen it. So, their recommendation was that all of the coal ash should be removed before any redevelopment of the property was undertaken. The ESAB then petitioned the mayor and council to follow the recommendations of this report. Our prime concern was this site is not lined. And so it's unclear what's happening to the groundwater. I have read the draft Brownfields agreement, and there is the following change to section 4, work to be performed. A new paragraph 11. Prior to the development of the Brownfield property, prospective developers shall excavate and remove all of the CCC structural fill from the site by a qualified contractor. Such CCC materials should then be transported to the company.
The time is now 7:31 p.m. and the library is closing in 29 minutes at 8 o'clock. Now, 7:30, and the library is closing at 8. Thank you.
Such CCC materials should then be transported to a properly lined landfill, which is certified to receive and store CCC material. Other paragraphs of the agreement shall then be modified accordingly to reflect this new language in paragraph 11. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tom. Next person is Darren.
Thank you. My name is Aaron Campbell. Thank you for your presentation. I'm going to be brief. My only concern is that, one, the language of this document is not clear for the layman. person who doesn't hold a degree, who doesn't study, environmental procedures on a daily basis. Most of the people that I have to report back to, I tell them. And for one thing, we don't, the town of Chapel Hill doesn't bat a thousand on being clear on what they plan on doing with something until like after it's done, and then they say, well, we tried telling you, which is too late at that point. This location has been in contention for multiple years, even before the police station was placed there. You know, one for the fact that there's coal ash in the ground, and two for the fact that its location is right there in the flood range. But I feel that the language needs to be changed on this document so that it can be clear to people so that they know what's actually going to be done in the final stage of this before it's done. So that we can be informed and we can actually be encouraged to know that something can be done, something be placed there that's going to benefit not just some of the people in this town, but all people. And with that, I appreciate your this.
Thank you, Mr. Darren. And next we'll have Nick.
Hey, good evening. I'm Nick Torrey with the Southern Environmental Law Center, representing Friends of Oak Creek. Throughout North Carolina, unlined coal ash dumps contaminating local communities are being removed to dry, mine, landfill storage. Millions of tons are being cleaned up safely all around us. You knows this very well. In Chapel Hill, the problem is much smaller, easier to deal with, but the pollution is just as serious. We have high levels of arsenic, lead, hexavalent and chromium, radiation in the coal ash, the groundwater, the soil at this site. But the primary problem is the coal ash itself, and the presentation sort of downplayed that part. That's the issue. What is going to happen to the ash? EPA studies recently found that the health risks from coal ash are much worse than previously understood. And there, for example, preliminary findings indicating that arsenic's cancer potency is 35 times greater than previously known. Yet, DEQ is proposing this agreement, which, let's be clear, would allow the town to leave all of the coal ash, all of the arsenic, all of the other pollutants in the middle of Chapel Hill forever. The proposed agreement would allow public green spaces and even a playground on top of the coal ash. It would put only a layer of dirt between our children and toxic pollutants. We know that dirt covers don't work. They have failed over and over again, including coal ash disasters in Mooresville near Charlotte. And in fact, this Chapel Hill site itself is an example of a dirt cover that has failed over the years to contain the ash. That's what we all know. The ash is now on the surface. We've all seen the pictures. That's what's happening, and it's a failed experiment already. And yet, that doesn't seem to have been considered in this agreement. Instead of a cleanup, this agreement would rely on boilerplate restrictions on a piece of paper in a county office. Kids and pets playing in the dirt do not read legal documents. That will not keep them safe. Worse, the coal ash at this site is perched on an eroding steep slope just above the floodplain of Bowling Creek. A large sinkhole even opened on the property this year. So, there may be some sites, there are some sites that are okay for Brownfields treatment, but this isn't it. This is not a car dealership that you can pave over and put up a waste. This is a very unusual thing. Leaving all of this unstable coal ash and pollution along the floodplain in the middle of town is a ticking time bomb. Any solution, at a minimum, must remove the most problematic areas of coal ash, as we've explained in our written comments. Covering up the problem and hoping it goes away, as this agreement is proposing to do tonight, is not responsible. It's not safe. We need a real cleanup. And I just want to encourage everyone who's here to bother to come out. Please stand up and speak and tell these people what you think of their agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Next is Julie.
Hello. Julie McClintock, president of Friends of Bowling Creek. We've been a 501c3 since 2013. Can I be heard? No.
Yes.
It's a little louder, all right? I'll try to do that. Yeah. All right. This agreement is unacceptable because it does not sufficiently protect public health from the on-site pollution. The fundamental problem is that the draft agreement requires no coal ash removal, which is the pollutant. Nick has already referred to EPA finding coal ash more dangerous than initially thought. The EPA found an elevated cancer risk even when ash comprises only 1 or 2 to 2% of the soil mixture. Coal ash is no longer used in North Carolina for structural fill. If this proposed plan goes forward as is, the town would rely on structural debris and coal ash as the foundation for these new buildings and parking deck. Only rarely have buildings been constructed on top of coal ash fill, and when they have, the results have been unsafe. And the developing sinkhole is an illustration. The coal ash is perched on the ledge overhanging Bowling Creek, an impaired waterway feeding Jordan Lake, a primary drinking water supply. The town removed 1,000 tons of coal ash that had washed down the bank to the creek area. That's already been done, where the public greenway is located. But the steep bank will continue to erode down the bank onto the greenway and into Bowling Creek. We have video footage of floodwaters during Hurricane Florence, lapping the hill of coal ash and inevitably carrying coal ash into Bowling Creek. The deed restrictions are inadequate to deal with the flooding and settling expected over time. Including a playground in this plan is nonsensical and dangerous. Council members, Chapel Hill, have expressed concern about the risk of removing the red ash. Yet, Southern Environmental Law Center has forged numerous agreements with Duke Energy to remove millions of tons of coal ash to line landfills in North Carolina and South Carolina, and done so safely. Bottom line is that the more ash removed from this site, the safer it will be for neighbors, town workers, and the public. In conclusion, I am submitting a letter from Pamela Schultz, a chemist and environmental engineer, dated March 2022. Her letter makes a crucial point that when the town council decided to proceed, they misunderstood the risk assessment results. Both long-term and short-term exposure to coal ash may have health consequences, and construction workers, as has already been noted by DEQ, would experience health impacts. We call upon the town of Chapel Hill and the Department of Environmental Quality of the state to reject this plan, redesign it, and do a plan that protects human health. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Julie. Next is Randall.
Just have an interest in truth, and I see in your presentation propagation of lies and the spread over the years about when discovered coal.
Can you talk to the mic?
Yeah, and when the town of Chapel discovered this coal ash in 2013, what was front page news presented to the Board of Aldermen, 1961, 62, by Ted Danziger, who was a local restaurant owner. He and eight of his patriots said, we're filing suits in the town of Chapel Hill for my store and nuisance because the university is dumping its coal ash in an illegal, non-sanitary landfill. Now, interestingly enough, Ted died 2 years after that presentation of cancer. Maybe related, maybe not, I don't know. But the town used to have a website called Future 828, which propagated the slide. I put an editorial on the Chapel Hill website called Carolina Coal Ash and Karma in fall of 2022. And had all those newspaper links and information was out there. So going forward, I think we need to be adults and say, this is what happened, this is how it happened. Town did not purchase the land section. It was condemned by a legal action, Board of Aldermen and County Clerk's Office, and for probably the sum of $1 without consideration. The Sparrow family was forced to give up that property. Now, had the town of Chapel Hill not performed that action, it might have the onus still on the family or someone else at this point. However, since the town of Chapel Hill lives in the shadow of the university, which basically is the board of master, it will not do the proper thing, just force the, I think you have a language in your document there that said, oh, whoever created this hazard cannot be involved in its redevelopment. Well, that perpetrator is the University of North Carolina and its cogeneration plant. Not a big property, but the University of North Carolina. All I gotta say about this, thank you for your time, and I think you should consider amending the language in your documents and perhaps disposing it. And I would also recommend a public Facebook page called Cancer Cluster Army NC. Enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you, Randall. Next on the list is Isabel.
Hi, my name is Isabel Geffner. I'm just a resident here in Chapel Hill. I'm just curious, is there a member of the town council here? And is there a member of our county commissioners here? Just curious to know that. I'm not a lawyer or a scientist. I'm just a resident, and the issue of the coal ash here in town came to my attention through my friend Caroline Armijo, who helped to run the Walnut Cove and Beaver's Creek issue with coal ash there, which perhaps many of you know about. When I learned about it, I do have a friend who's on the board of the NRDC, the National Resources Defense Council, and I called him to tell him about this problem, and he said there's one person who is the czar of all things that have to do with coal ash, and that person's name is Nick Torrey. And I didn't know Nick, but I said, wow, that's pretty great that right here in my own hometown, there's the guy who the NRDC is calling the person who knows everything about coal ash. And Nick, you may remember that I had a brief phone call with you. One of the reasons this issue is important to me is because of my friend Jim. My friend Jim worked at the Chapel Hill Police Department for 35 years. He founded and ran the crisis unit there, and different from many of the folks who work at the Chapel Hill Police Department, his job was basically office bound. And he lived in that office for 35 years. He was the prime example of fabulously good health. He took his bicycle everywhere. He walked everywhere. He was a mentor to me. And he contracted leukemia and died. And when I told this story to Nick, he said, you know, you don't really know what caused his leukemia, and now you'll never find out. And that just left me thinking, who else might have cancer as a result of the coal ash that sits on that hillside? Or the folks who walk along Golden Creek, the people who died of cancer in Walnut Cove because of the coal ash. The whole issue of UNC's culpability is just outrageous to me, that it's not your job to hold them accountable. That's something that we have to say. And the other thing I just want to say is it's very rare to be in a town meeting where there are people of all ages. So I'm just so grateful that, you know, I'm an old gray-haired lady now, but there's some of us here, and there are also young people who care about our environment who are here. So I hope you'll all do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Isabel. And let's see, next we have Adam.
Hello, my name is Adam Siri, I want to thank you all for the opportunity for all of us to speak here tonight. I'm here as a parent of two boys who grew up digging in the dirt and playing in the area around the coal ash site before we made the danger.
I'm also a member of the elected town board, but tonight I'm here as a parent. And the message I want to give you as a parent and a 57-year Chapel Hill resident who lives very near this site that you all have been considering is twofold. So it's go back to the drawing board and redo this agreement to require removal most or all of the ash. This is for two reasons. My boys grew up there, as I said, and played there, and I worry about that. Especially when I read new reports from the EPA about the increasing dangers of coal ash that have been referenced here tonight, and the radiation exposure dangers, and the increasing hint of dangers that research scientists are finding. That's very disturbing to me as a parent. And no other parent should have to go through that again. They shouldn't have to. That shouldn't be. Let's require removal of this ash. And the second message I want to give you all from my personal experience as a neighbor of this contamination is that I've stood on the coal ash on the site with some of the most prominent scientists who work in the area of coal ash research, and right next to them is they're taking core samples from way down below in the ash and seeing the probes go through huge voids. You can feel it going up and down. And so the idea when I read the agreement that somehow without requiring removal, that we can just put dirt on top of this ash and build on it, just seems absolutely silly to me from my personal experience. So my message to you is, from my personal experience as a parent, as a resident, is to take this agreement, go back to the drawing board and require removal of all the ash. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Next, we're going to have Margaret, and after that person get prepared, Liv, I think it's.
Hello, I'm a professor at UNC, and served Can you hold the mic up? Yes. This.
Library, the time is 7:50 p.m. and the library will be closing in 10 minutes at 8 p.m. Please make your final selections and be help see the library.
I just want to make a brief comment that I think as I teach on environmental issues. It's very clear that risk assessments continue to change. It is safer to remove the coal ash than to potentially down the road discover that it should. The risks are both public health, heard people expressed, also to other species of humans who inhabit the creek and have soil. And I think we need to start considering these things. Issue of groundwater and rain has been mentioned. We have just seen a 1,000-year flood in eastern North Carolina. We are going to see more dramatic flooding as a result of climate change. So do the safest thing possible, recommend the safest. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret.
Can you hear me? Yes. My name is Liv Hutchby, and I have been a resident of Chapel Hill for 5 years, so not nearly long enough to, but long enough to know that coal ash is not a good thing. And like fracking in coal ash for years, I'm a long-time learner, lifelong learner, thank you very much. And I have values that include protecting water and air and the many species of life that depend on them. Building anything on coal ash is unacceptable to me. Please do not allow buildings or playgrounds on the site until more coal ash is removed and Bowling Creek is permanently protected.
No playgrounds, please. No office buildings, please. Don't tell me it's safe to build on coal ash. We know that coal ash is lethal to human health. Coal ash, toxins, and hazardous. And from the beginning of the scenario with Chapel Hill somehow acquiring A2A by eminent domain, the puzzle of what to do with trash, construction, debris, and then hazardous waste has existed. What was in the edge of town is now in the middle of town, across the road from the Superfund site that's being cleaned up. Why not clean up the coal ash site? Yes, it's expensive. So is cancer treatment. Yes, it's dirty work. So is every landfill. We know too many certified coal ash landfills that leak through their plastic liner. So how do we protect Bowling Creek in the water of another county where our coal ash might go? That's the dilemma, isn't it? It's an environmental justice issue. Yes, it's taken years to get to this point of decision making, and we still haven't seen a report from the employees at the police department that gives us facts about our health, the health of the police. So, how many have made medical issues? How many policemen have had medical issues because they worked in a building over the coal ash? So I thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I hope that you understand that sometimes nervous systems are affected by coal ash. And I have a tremor, and I blame it on coal ash. I'm grateful to all of you for being here and for making a statement and for the presentations that you took time. But just understand the Brownfield agreement as it's presented tonight is not acceptable to me. Thank you. I know y'all know.
Thank you, Ms. Libb. Next, we will have Sue, and after Sue, it will be Mary.
I'm parents and resident, a parent, and a user of the trail. I second to what's been said by a lot of people, which is the only safe thing to do is contain it with some non-permeable structure, either on-site or on-site. It needs to be removed. I didn't, for example, we had just this week, there was 1,000-year flood in Carolina. What would happen to a site that's not contained with that degree of flooding? Everything will go into the creek. I'm not a scientist, so I don't maybe have everything totally right, but I also didn't understand that you test the surface water. How many tests were done during rain? I just wanted to say I would like to see more testing of it. And also, it would, I appreciate the presentation. It would be nice to have the chemicals to come for non-scientists and put up there. I had no idea what most of those were, and I'm sure it wasn't the only one. I'm not sure if I have anything more to say, but I do feel like one speaker spoke about how everything is very deep, but the proposed solution sounds to be very superficial. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue.
I'm sorry. Can everybody hear me? Yes. Hey, I am a proud UNC alum from 2023 who has advocated for the closure of UNC coal-fired plant. There are, it's said that 10,000 tons have been removed, or 1,000 tons. fence have been removed already, but where are they being put? There's somebody's backyard, there's somebody's neighbor now. I mean, there's, moving it's horrible, people, it's gotta stop. Every good parent teaches their child, teaches our kids that we have to stop. We have to clean up our mess before we're allowed to bring more stuff into our room. Let's take a lesson from what we teach our kids. You used the word, sir, unproductive land, and many would argue that land left fallow, biblical concept, is also productive. Not only does land left alone heal, but it produces increasing amounts of CO2, O2, and absorption of carbon dioxide particles, which is a very productive and crucial part of our environment. I do wonder whether the residents have been tested with controls. And at some point, if you could define the terms not appreciably different in terms of upstream, downstream. Water, so it is important to know that it's not going to be used for people, although recreational use ends up being kids rolling in so animals use the water as a water supply. Then it goes into the sea eventually, and I do love me some fish. As you review and revise these plans, which I really kindly remove the word recreational from any list of uses. Remove the ash. Remove the ash. The barriers do not stop radiation, nor do they keep cancerous toxins from seeping down or being washed by the increasingly climate episodes into the groundwater, hurting critters, grandkids, anglers, and dying cancers, and the ones.
Thank you, Mary. So I believe it's Kirsten. And after Kirsten, we will have Hunter.
Attention library patrons, the time is 8 p.m. and the library is now closed. We're really getting tomorrow at 10 a.m. Have a wonderful evening.
Okay, fantastic. Hi, I'm Kirsten. I'm representing the Sunrise Movement at UNC Chapel. And I just want to follow up on an earlier question about testing. Just because one time 5 years ago, one of the toxins tested was in there present. And again, I want to emphasize that was 5 years ago. So I want to know if there are any plans to do updated testing on water pollution before we go ahead.
Okay, next is Hunter. Thank you, Kirsten.
There we go. All right, my name's Hunter. You all right?
Hang it up, stick it up in your face.
All right, my name is Hunter, and I'm a student at UNC School of Law. And one of the downsides, of course, the backside of things is everybody's sort of asked the questions or made the comment already, but I do want to follow up on a few points. It was good to hear folks in the room talk about climate change and the impact that's going to have on the future. But I did not hear enough from y'all about the impact of climate change on the future of this site and what sort of efforts are going to be undertaken on the resilience side of things to make sure that whatever plan you do follow through on, that the future warming and the weather changes that come with that, how that's going to be handled. The second point, with the people on the site, even if not recreational, commercial, and office space on the site, I would like to hear more about how EQ was considering that the people sitting in an office building on the same greenhouse, they're not living there every day. The second most common place you spend after your own house is at work. So I am now convinced regarding EQ's comments today on that front, so we'll hear more about that. And thirdly, I echo the concerns about sampling. Some demo, like we mentioned earlier, there was 4
samplings of the water at Bowling Creek, but what were the conditions of the samplings? How were they different from each sampling? How is rainfall, increased rainfall from climate change, for example, impacting runoff and the pollution that's associated with the site? So I know it's getting late and we'll, thank you so much for letting me have this time to speak.
Oh, thank you for your comments, Hunter. Let's see. We have Drew. There, Drew. Roberts.
Diane Roberts.
My apologies. Diane yes, Diane Roberts. Late in the day, my apologies.
You notice I signed up late because I was listening to Nick. Yes, we should all speak up. I want to just echo what I really appreciate about the history that we did not get or was misrepresented to us, because I've lived here for 30 odd years. And this issue has come and gone, and each time it comes up, many people think it's a new issue and it's here for the first time. You're not really here, you're here to give us information about Brownfields, but it's our town representatives who are responsible for proposing coming to you. And the point I want to make is that several years ago, I was on a committee for the NCDEQ. And this was presented by one of the town council members because they wanted to bring it to the Brownfield. And at that point, they did want to put residential on it. And had I not asked them to give us the other side, because the council member was selling snake oil to the NCDEQ, I asked Victoria to come and explain the implications of this site. And at that point, they said, we cannot endorse residential on that site. So every time this comes up, it takes a new permutation, but it takes a permutation from the electeds, not from DEQ. However, you're not without responsibility, because what you presented to us was something that no layperson could understand. And I am a garden designer, horticulturalist, and what you presented was a flat plane of something that has elevation. No one could look at that and understand where the silk fence was, where the creek was, how wash would come down. Water moves downhill, everything goes downhill through gravity, and I think that presenting visuals that people can understand and say, oh, in that same meeting was a woman who said, I run on that all the time. I had no idea that was there. So that people who live here now don't even understand what is being presented to them. And shame on the town of Chapel Hill for putting this forward as something that is efficacy and is a benefit to the community. Shame on you.
Thank you, Miss Diane. And let's see, Rob?
Yeah, really, I have more of a question than a comment. With that question in context, it does seem as though, given the current trends with the risk analysis and climate change, it seems like the cheaper option and the more affordable option in the long run is to actually just remove the coal ash rather than develop the site again and then find out, okay, we've got a large problem and we're going to have to go back in and we're going to have to do something about it. It seems like the efficacious manner of dealing with this is just to remove the coal ash. And so with that, I'd like to say, where that site sits, you're saying that there's no detectable difference between the two populations above the police station and below the police station, with the concentrations of different anions coming out of that coal ash pile. And those are all fairly, I mean, my understanding of it is that these are all fairly highly mobile heavy metals within the soil chemistry profile. And we're not picking up anything that is completely contained within this site. And I'm wondering, one, how far downstream have you sampled? Because there's also a strange thing with the Piedmont and the geology of this area, which is often on the ridge tops, you've got fracturing of rock, you've got a lot of different channels for water to move through the soil profile and the bedrock, perhaps a little bit more deeply than the superficial movement. And you're right on the edge of the Triassic Basin at the police station. So you're only, you're a quarter mile, maybe, from dropping into the Triassic. And so has there been any sort of assessment of the movement of these heavy metals through a deeper flow and then out into Bowling Green further downstream? I don't quite understand some of the chemistry that you guys are coming up with to counterbalance all this. So I think that's my comment. And would you let your kids play there?
Or your grandkids.
Or yourself? Thank you.
So thank you, Rob, for your comments, as well as everyone who has spoken tonight. Thank you for your public comments. The staff will be here for some time, a few more minutes. If you have additional questions or comments that you would like to speak with them, we're going to go ahead and close at this point of the meeting so that staff and those who need to properly prepare for tomorrow and the library staff can do that. But otherwise, as I mentioned, our staff is here if you have any additional questions that you would like to ask them. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Oh.
If you refer to the smalls.